Okay, welcome to the deep dive. We've pulled together quite a stack of material for this one. Lots of articles, research, notes, all focused on highly processed food and, well, junk food.
Yeah, and I think most people listening probably think, okay, yeah, junk food's bad for me, I get it. But this material, it really goes beyond that surface level, doesn't it?
It really does. It digs into why it's just so incredibly common, like the science behind why we crave it and the full scope of its impact. It's pretty eye-opening.
And a lot of this is guided by that huge recent study, right? The Umbrella Review.
That's right, yeah. A massive review looking at data from almost 10 million people. I mean, the scale alone tells you it's a serious investigation.
Absolutely. And, one source draws this really interesting parallel. It compares ultra-processed food today, UPF, to cigarettes back in the 70s.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about it. Back then, you had growing evidence about the dangers of smoking, links to cancer, heart disease. Governments were starting to murmur about warnings, maybe taxes.
Right, the knowledge was starting to build.
Exactly. But despite that, cigarettes were just everywhere. Ads on TV, billboards, sponsorships. People smoked in offices, bars, planes. It was totally embedded.
So the sheer ubiquity kind of masked the danger or made it seem less real.
That's the idea presented. And the sources suggest UPF is in a similar position now. It's just everywhere. The new normal, almost.
Despite all this mounting evidence we're about to discuss, it definitely raises that question. Why is it still so dominant if the harm is becoming clearer?
So that's kind of our mission here, isn't it?
Yeah.
To use these sources to unpack that.
Yeah.
We need to figure out what UPF actually is, look at the health impacts, which are way beyond just weight gain, get into the science of why it's so appealing.
Look, the bigger picture too, right? The systems, production, marketing, access that keep it everywhere globally.
Yeah, and the corporate side, the resistance to change. And then finally, what the material suggests about ways forward, both big picture and, for us as individuals, all based strictly on this pile of research.
Absolutely. Let's dig in. So maybe the best place to start is just defining terms. What exactly do these sources mean by ultra-processed food?
Right. So based on the material, it's not just any processing. It's about the extent and type of industrial processing. Think food that's been really broken down, maybe beaten to a pulp, is the phrase used.
Okay.
And then reconstituted with added flavors, colors, emulsifiers, other additives, often ready to eat, and crucially, designed to look and taste, well, delicious. Irresistible even.
So it's the heavy industrial manipulation and the addition of specific, often synthetic ingredients?
Precisely. And the examples are key here. Obvious ones, sure. Burgers, chips, chocolate bars, sodas. But the sources make it clear the category also includes stuff you might not think of.
Like what?
Like many mass-produced baked goods, some protein bars, lots of breakfast cereals, even certain types of yogurt.
Wow, okay. Protein bars and yogurts. That definitely broadens the picture beyond just junk food.
It really does. It shows this isn't just about obvious treats. And yeah, we know they're usually high in added sugar, fat, salt, and low in fiber and vitamins. But the material suggests that's just scratching the surface.
And that brings us back to that huge review, doesn't it? Because the health impacts it found, they go way beyond just the nutritional basics.
Way beyond. That review, the world's largest of its kind, remember, it delivered a really staggering finding. UPF consumption is directly linked to 32 different diseases. 32.
32. That number is hard to even process. It sounds like it affects almost everything.
It really covers a vast range of health issues highlighted in the sources. We're talking mental health problems, respiratory conditions like asthma, major cardiovascular diseases, gastrointestinal issues, metabolic stuff like diabetes, various cancers, and overall mortality, risk of dying sooner.
So it's systemic. It hits the whole body. Do the sources give specific numbers on the increased risks?
They do, and they're significant. Things like a 66% increased risk for obesity, 50% for cardiovascular disease mortality, 12% for type 2 diabetes, 53% for common mental disorders overall, and 22% specifically for depression.
And you mentioned asthma, cancer links too, leading to that overall increased risk of death. Was it 21%?
Yeah, 21%. It's a really damning picture painted by this large-scale evidence.
And it's not just stats, right? The sources also included personal stories.
Very powerful ones, like Carol, whose diet-related obesity nearly killed her before she had surgery, or Rogelio, a taxi driver whose weight gain massively limited his mobility, his ability to work and live. It puts a human face on these numbers.
Okay, so we have this huge category of industrially created food linked to a massive list of serious health problems, which makes you ask, why is it so hard to stop eating it? Is it just that it tastes good, or is there more going on, something engineered?
That's exactly where the sources go next. Into the science of, well, craveability. It focuses heavily on sugar, salt, and fat. These are described as the key ingredients that make these foods almost irresistible.
And the industry has specific ways of thinking about how these work, right? Terms they use.
They do. Salt is sometimes called the flavor burst, often put right on the surface so it hits you instantly. Fats provide the mouthfeel, that creamy, rich, satisfying texture.
Mm.
And sugar. Well, sugar is often seen as the most powerful driver for many people, tapping into really basic biological reward pathways.
And it's not accidental. The sources say food scientists are deliberately engineering this stuff.
Precisely. They engineer something called the bliss point. It's described as finding that perfect amount of sugar, or that perfect combination of sugar, fat, and salt, to maximize the food's appeal. Not too little, not too much, just right to make you crave it.
Finding that sweet spot, literally, that hits the pleasure centers just right. And this leads to what one journalist called craveability, or more adishness.
Exactly. Michael Moss's terms. It means you just keep wanting more, which is why the material brings in comparisons to addictive substances. That famous rat study is mentioned.
The one where they chose sugar over cocaine.
That's the one. It's a stark illustration of how powerful that drive for sugar can be, at least in those experiments.
Wow, sugar over cocaine. That says a lot.
And the neurobiology backs this up, to some extent. Research cited shows changes in the brain from high UPF consumption that look similar, comparable, to changes seen with excessive use of things like alcohol or cocaine or tobacco.
So when people say they feel addicted to junk food, it might not just be a figure of speech, according to this research.
But according to these sources, it could have a real biological basis. The term hyperpalatable food is used. This engineered bliss point combination essentially overrides your body's natural signals that say, I'm full.
Making it hard or even impossible to stop.
Yeah. Rebecca's story in the sources, her struggles with compulsive eating, really brings this to life. And those nutritionist examples like, you could probably eat endless gulab jamun, but maybe not endless dal or eggs. They highlight how these foods bypass normal satiety cues.
It's like they're designed to short-circuit our natural stop mechanisms and the gut health connection.
Right, the gut-brain axis. Consuming a lot of this stuff, high calorie, low nutrient, low fiber. Think apple juice versus a whole apple, right? One's got fiber and structure, the other's just sugar, water, basically.
Yeah.
That kind of diet can actually change your gut microbiome, the bacteria living in your gut.
Sure.
And the sources suggest this shift can lead to issues like bloating, skin problems like acne, and even affect your mood and well-being.
So engineered for craving, potentially addictive effects, messing with brain signals, messing with gut health. But it's not just about our individual biology, is it? The sources emphasize a much bigger system.
Oh, absolutely. A massive, pervasive system. The material looks back at the history, like White Castle in the 20s, focusing on cleanliness to build trust.
Right, making fast food seem modern and safe.
Then the rise of drive-ins, McDonald's perfecting automation, fast food becoming this American staple. But then there was a shift noted, especially from the 1980s onward.
What happened then?
Well, as these companies got huge, went public, the sources say the focus shifted much more heavily towards profit. That meant using more preservatives for shelf life, finding cheaper ingredients, optimizing for cost above almost everything else.
Which kind of feeds back into the health issue, right? High calorie, low quality nutrients. You get hungry again faster.
Exactly. It creates a cycle. And this whole system is propped up by incredibly sophisticated marketing, designed to break down any resistance.
Like seeing an ad, then the golden arches later on, and it just triggers something.
Precisely. Ads, planting seeds, symbols triggering memories, then removing barriers. Drive-thrus mean you don't leave your car. Simple menus reduce decision fatigue. Toys target kids super young, trying to build habits before they're even 10. Loyalty apps. It's relentless.
And it's not just marketing psychology. The sources really stress accessibility and cost, the whole idea of food deserts and food insecurity.
Yeah, this is crucial. Food deserts, meaning areas, often disadvantaged ones, where there's just no easy access to a proper grocery store with fresh, affordable food, maybe nothing within a mile in a city.
Yeah.
Food insecurity is simply not being able to consistently afford nutritious food.
So for many people, it's not that they don't know better or that they're just weak-willed. It's that UPF is often the easiest, cheapest, sometimes the only option available.
That's a key point in the material. In some disadvantaged groups, UPF can make up something like 80% of the diet. You contrast the sheer number of McDonald's, that stat about the longest distance between them being only 120 miles in the U.S., with the lack of grocery stores in many neighborhoods. It's an environmental and economic issue.
And this isn't just a U.S. problem. The sources look at India, too, showing similar dynamics.
Yes, a huge shift there. Junk food sales apparently tripled, hitting $30 billion in 2022. A big move away from traditional home cooking towards these processed options.
And the sources also highlighted specific issues with street food in India as part of this landscape.
They did. Concerns about safety, one study cited found 25% of samples unsafe. Issues with weak laws or maybe weak enforcement and lack of real punishment for violations. And then basic hygiene problems.
Like what kind of hygiene issues?
Things related to lack of refrigeration in hot weather leading to bacteria growth, chemical contamination. The example of synthetic paneer made with non-food ingredients was mentioned.
Wow.
Poor personal hygiene, vendors maybe working near open drains, not using gloves, washing plates poorly, all contributing factors.
Which connects to that deli belly issue sometimes talked about with tourists.
Yeah, the sources mention the concern that the capital's name gets associated with foodborne illness. They even try to rank street foods by risk, pani puri being high risk due to handling in raw water, versus safer options like steamed idly or cooked eggs.
And wasn't there something about companies having different standards in different countries that seems particularly troubling?
Yes, that finding that some companies apparently sell products, even baby food, with added sugar in India, while the same brands in Europe, with stricter rules, don't have that added sugar.
So, different formulations depending on local regulations. It feels like they're targeting children differently.
It definitely raises that question, and it leads right into the next big theme in the sources, corporate power, and how it's used to resist regulation.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, there's that leaked internal Nestlé document mentioned where they acknowledge that over 60% of their mainstream food and drink products couldn't meet a recognized definition of health.
So, internally, they knew a majority of their portfolio wasn't healthy.
Seems so.
Yeah.
And yet the sources described this secret meeting back in 1999 with CEOs from major U.S. food companies. The topic of linking their products to the obesity crisis came up, but the idea was apparently dismissed.
Why?
The focus, according to the account, was on protecting profits, protecting their company jewels, the profitable ingredients like sugar, salt, fat, rather than tackling a public health issue head-on.
That stands in pretty stark contrast to what places like Mexico have done, based on the sources.
Exactly. Mexico brought in sugar taxes, banned cartoon mascots targeting kids, and mandated those black octagon warning labels for high sugar, salt, fat, or calories.
And did that have an effect?
The sources say yes, some companies actually changed their recipes. They reformulated products to avoid getting slapped with those warning labels.
So how did the big food companies react overall?
Predictably, perhaps. Strong opposition, legal challenges, arguments that labels confuse consumers or create unnecessary fear. The sources use pretty strong language to describe it, suggesting contempt for ordinary people, using delay tactics, showing indifference to the health consequences for the sake of profit.
Fighting tooth and nail against transparency and public health measures.
That's the picture painted. Switzerland's given as another example a country with high obesity rates, but very few legal restrictions, which the sources attribute partly to heavy industry lobbying.
Like the Fanta example.
Right. Swiss Fanta having more than double the sugar of UK Fanta, where there's a sugar tax. It shows how regulation, or the lack of it, directly impacts what's in the product.
And Nestlé was specifically mentioned lobbying against rules like Mexico's and Switzerland.
Yes, emails reportedly showed them lobbying the Swiss government, calling warning labels radical or lacking scientific rationale, trying to prevent stricter public health measures in their home country.
It really reinforces that perspective in the sources about economic interests trumping public health, especially concerning children.
Yeah, and that pediatrician's quote is powerful, framing the manipulation of children via marketing and the food environment as potentially violating their human rights. Asking if we're basically sacrificing future generations to this obesogenic environment created in large part by these commercial interests. It's a heavy thought presented in the material.
Incredibly heavy. So, okay, the system is powerful, the food is engineered, the corporations are resistant, it feels overwhelming. How do the sources suggest we find a path forward? It can't be all doom and gloom.
No, it's not. But they are realistic about the difficulty for individuals. That stat about 95% of diets failing long-term is mentioned.
95% regain the weight. Yeah.
And that little detail about Nestlé owning Jenny Craig? Well, it certainly makes you think about the incentives within the system, doesn't it? Is it set up for success or repeat business?
Right. That's a striking point about the complexity here.
But okay, solutions. On a systemic level, the sources talk about needing much stricter inspections, tackling corruption that allows unsafe food practices. Better infrastructure is key things like reliable cold storage, or even new tech like those cold gels mentioned for hotter climates.
And consequences.
Yes, real punishment for companies that break the rules. Making food safety laws strict and actually enforcing them, maybe more like Europe where penalties could be severe, that changes corporate behavior.
And making healthy choices easier for people, like that French system.
Absolutely, the AE Nutri-Score rating. Simple visual cues on the front of packs. It helps people make quicker, healthier choices without needing a nutrition degree to decode the label, especially with all the hidden names for sugar and stuff.
So big systemic changes are definitely needed. But what about for individuals trying to navigate this right now? The sources offered some practical tips too, right? Drawn
Yeah.
from that street food context, but maybe broader.
Yeah, definitely applicable more broadly. Things like being cautious about water sources and general hygiene, especially for raw foods, thinking about risks like H. pylori, prioritizing food that's freshly cooked when you can.
Understanding that super cheap often means cheap, maybe unsafe ingredients.
Right. Reuse cooking oil, fillers instead of real ingredients. Also, just visually checking, does the place look clean? Does the vendor practice good hygiene? Basic stuff, but important.
And building up your own immunity is mentioned too as a kind of baseline defense.
Yeah, because realistically, complete avoidance is tough. The sources lean towards minimizing exposure, maybe aiming for that 80-20 idea, 80% whole, nutritious foods, 20% less ideal stuff, rather than striving for impossible perfection.
And educating yourself.
Definitely. Checking official sources for information on food safety or common adulterants, like using the FSSAI resources in India was suggested. Knowing what to look out for empowers you.
Okay, and finally, any actionable advice on managing those cravings and habits, knowing how engineered these foods are?
Yes, a couple of key strategies emerged from the material. One was about front-loading your nutrition. Make sure your breakfast and lunch are really solid nutritious, high in protein.
Why protein specifically?
The research highlighted suggests getting enough protein early on helps regulate appetite throughout the day and can significantly reduce those intense cravings for processed snacks later on, preventing potential binging.
Okay, so front load protein. And what about that afternoon slump, the 4-6 p.m. danger zone?
Right. The advice there is strategic substitution. Don't have those hyper-palatable, engineered, salty, sweet, savory snacks easily accessible during that time.
Yeah.
Instead, plan ahead. Have healthier alternatives ready and waiting. Fruit, a hard-boiled egg, some nuts or seeds, maybe Greek yogurt.
Make the healthy choice the easy choice in that moment.
Exactly. It's about setting up your immediate environment to counter the pull of those engineered cravings.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive has really pulled back the curtain, hasn't it? From the shocking breadth of health impacts way beyond just weight, to the deliberate science making this food so hard to quit, and then the massive systems keeping it everywhere, the corporate playbook.
Yeah, it really shows it's not just about individual willpower. It's biology being exploited by intentionally designed food within an environment that's often saturated with unhealthy options in marketing and defended by powerful economic interests that, as the sources document, often push back hard against public health efforts.
So navigating it or breaking free really requires both understanding that huge system and advocating for change while also making conscious, informed personal choices against the grain.
That seems to be the takeaway. It's a tough battle on both fronts.
So maybe the provocative thought to leave you, the listener, with drawing from all this material. In a world where so much food is engineered for profit and craveability, seemingly prioritizing that over health, and where powerful companies actively resist making things safer or clearer, how much responsibility really falls on you, the individual? And are we, as that one source asked so starkly, potentially sacrificing the health of future generations in this environment we've allowed to develop? Definitely something to chew on.